actually published the system.
Beautiful. Alright, we should probably make a start. So just before we start, my name's Andy Bearsley, and I just wanted to do a very quick survey. Hands up if you've worked with me, come across me in some shape or form in the performance industry. Yeah, I told you so.
Keep your hands up if you dated him. You've been out for dinner. Where's Jacoby? I know he's been out for dinner with me a few times.
Yeah, that's right.
Dates. I've got photographic evidence.
Alright. Okay, we also got a bunch of t-shirts and giveaways. I think that's probably about your size. There you go. Yeah, so this is actually a really good crowd because a lot of familiar faces, but also some new ones as well. So I'd like to just maybe do a bit of a recap for some of you who I haven't caught up with for a little while. Brad, nice to see you. How you going? Yeah, so I'm Andy Bearsley. I was born in Wellington, but I grew up in Australia, and I've spent the last, I don't know, it's about the last 12 years in the performance industry, and really mainly based in Melbourne. So I work for Mercury, right? Working with Load Runner, which is kind of the, you know, back in those days, the product. It's still pretty awesome. And I had 6 years of Mercury and 4 years of HP. And I was travelling a lot throughout APJ, you know, a lot of China and Japan and India and Singapore, and my wife said, Andy, guess what? You have 2 kids, and they live in Melbourne, and it would be good if you spent a bit of time back here. So I thought, oh, I need to kind of change gears. So I jumped into ITKO at that point when they were being acquired by CA. So I had 2 years working with CA Lisa on the service virtualization side. But about a year into it, a company called AppDynamics came up on my radar, and I hadn't heard of them before, and they'd kind of just come out of stealth mode. And I was kind of really interested to see what they did. And so I reached out, and I had my own application that was just running in a server. It was actually doing some screen scraping for, it was Google Finance for Tesla stock option prices, because I've always wanted a Tesla. Right? And I figured the only way I'll be able to have enough money to buy a Tesla and import it to Australia is to see if there are any patterns that are going on in the Tesla options, because it happens over a week. And I had a program that did the screen scraping, and I was interested in AppDynamics, and I thought, oh, that's really interesting. I wonder if I can use AppDynamics to find the issues with my code, because it was actually running really slow. So I actually just went onto appdynamics.com, downloaded a free trial, got it installed, got it up and running, and it showed me where my crappy code was really quickly. And I loved that, and I actually really kind of fell in love with AppDynamics. And so I reached out to the head recruiter in the US, and I said, you're not in Australia, right? When are you going to come to Australia? And they said, oh yeah, we'll be moving out some stage in the future. You know, we've got big growth plans, but not just yet. So I reached out to the guy in APJ, because I can be a bit of a, my wife calls me an obsessive troubleshooter. So I thought, oh, I'm going to crack this nut somehow. So I reached out to the head of APJ and I said, when are you coming to Australia? And they said, oh, not yet, not yet. And so every month I pinged them. You know, I just said, how's it going? You guys are doing great. I see you had some great results. I said, I'm coming to Singapore. Are you there? They said, no, we're not, but we've got some guys coming to Australia, have some coffees. So I kind of chatted with them on and off every month for about 6 months. And then I got this call out of the blue from the guys in the US, and they said, look, we're coming out to Australia, and we've already selected the country manager, Andrew Brockfield, and we need a pre-sales guy, and apparently all of our guys have talked to you. And so, you know, when could you start? And I thought, oh, here we go, this is really good. So I actually jumped on the plane and flew up to San Francisco for 7 hours of interviews. And they said, yeah, but have you used AppDynamics before? What do you like with performance? And I said, oh, well, let me demo it to you. And so I demoed my own application that had performance issues. The only problem was I'd fixed the performance issues because I'd found them with AppDynamics. Anyway, so that was really good. So I joined 2nd of December. So I was employee number 1.5. I started 5 minutes after Brocky. And so it started off as the 2 of us, and then it became the 4 of us. So there's Josh Richardson in the crowd, put up your hand. Josh is also based in Melbourne. We've got Masuda, who's based up in Sydney. We've got 2 more Sydney people who are starting really soon. So we're going through this sort of massive growth curve, and it's a lot of fun. Like it's kind of crazy at the moment. It's really good fun, and part of the thing that's driving a lot of I guess the inbound activity for us is where we are. We've ended up on the Gartner Magic Quadrant, which is up here. So 2 years ago or 3 years ago, we weren't on the Magic Quadrant at all, and then we started off here. I think it was about 2 years ago. And now we're right up into that part of the corner. And so when people are looking at application performance monitoring, you go, okay, so depending on if you believe Gartner or not, or you at least take them as one of the sources of information. Who are the people who are the new players in the APM space? And it's really, so it's New Relic, AppDynamics, Riverbed, and Compuware. And New Relic and AppDynamics, we've got a very similar history, same DNA. So we both come from essentially the people who created New Relic. That guy was a guy called Lou Cern, who was the CEO of Wiley. CA acquired Wiley. So if you get the letters Lou Cern, if you get the letters of his name and swap them around, it spells out New Relic. Right, that's where he came from. And so the CEO of Wiley went to New Relic, created that. The chief architect, a guy called Jyoti Bansal, who's an absolute genius, a real visionary. So he created AppDynamics, and it's the same, similar background, but Lou Cern said, okay, we're going to focus on the small market. We're going to be purely SaaS only. And Jyoti said, well, you know what? The banks and the telcos and governments, they can't have SaaS as an easy offering. We need to have something that we can do on-premise as well. So we have both a SaaS and on-premise approach, and it works really, really well for us. And people love us. Like our Net Promoter Score, I don't know if you guys know what Net Promoter Scores is, but ours, it's about 84, which is higher than Apple. Right. So yeah, it's pretty amazing. So it's a great place to be. So that's a bit of a background of where I've come from and what I've been doing for the last 6 months with Brocky. So that's just a background, a quick recap of where the APM market is going. So for the session, I wanted to maybe stir up a bit of discussion. So the topic of this is dumb and dumber. And the real question I want to ask is so how smart is the monitoring data that you're collecting? Right? How smart is it? So the premise I have is that big data is fundamentally bad for us. Right? It has these negative impacts that make life more difficult for us when we're doing troubleshooting. So the whole session is about why big data is bad, but specifically, and probably start throwing beer bottles at this stage, but make sure they're full, because I don't have one. So I guess the premise is really around why big monitoring data is bad, and I think this can make life difficult for us when we're finding issues, and specifically, why we should make the move towards smart data. So I'm going to try and convince you. Feel free to heckle, but hear me out. So I guess the first question we need to ask is why is there a market for monitoring tools at all, right? Because surely applications should just work as they were designed, right? But there's a really big need for application monitoring tools. And the reason is that things often don't go to plan. And if there's an issue, typically if there's a performance or a stability issue, we need to have the monitoring tools to help us to really quickly identify and remediate it, right? And for me, it's all about quickly, right? Because I come from a performance testing background. We often have a really small, narrow window of opportunity to fix issues, and we don't have the luxury of time. So, Brad, in your job, do you have the luxury of time? Never. Never. That was a great answer. That was a t-shirt worthy answer. There you go. It's going to be really easy. Yeah, so it's part of our DNA, right? We never have enough time to do it. Okay, so the next question is, well, who actually uses monitoring tools? Is it just for ops? Well, the ops are actually really important, and I used to neglect that. Like when on the Mercury side, when I was thinking about performance testing, I kind of forget about the people who are on the operational side. But and then I kind of go back when I started off as a graduate. One of my first gigs was I was doing shift operations at Shell, babysitting the mainframe. And so I was one of the operators at 3 o'clock in the morning, really crazy group of people. And for us, we had to use these tools. It had to be intuitive, right? Because we're not performance testers or developers, but you really got to understand application performance and put it into context really easily without necessarily needing to be a dev. Okay, so I guess the whole aim is to help prevent business impacts. But my question is, so what is business impact? What is it? Because I think it's a very personal thing. It can vary a lot, depending on who you are and what application you're using. So a good example of business impact, so it might be people getting angry, stuff blowing up, or things running slow. I was at one of the big banks last week, and business impact for the guy who I was working with was very, very specific, because the CEO had walked into a bank branch up in Brisbane, and the CEO had gone to the staff, saying, okay, how's everything going? What can we improve? What's the, what are the issues that affect you? And the number one issue that the staff had was their internal system for managing their high-value customers was running really slow. And so they reported that back to the CEO. The CEO reported that to the CIO and said, fix this. The CEO went to the head of the business and said, fix it. And it flowed all the way down to a guy that I was working with. And he had to actually show that they were fixing the issue or his job was on the line, right? So for him, business impact was actually very, very personal. So you've got to think, okay, so what's the worst thing that can happen and how can we help remediate that? So in the meantime, we talk about application performance monitoring. But think about what's going on in the enterprise at the moment. It's kind of this process of bloating, I think. When we talk about enterprise data, there are lots of sources of data. It can come from everywhere, right? So it might be log files, email monitoring. Is anyone from Splunk here in the room? Maybe? Okay, good. I love Splunk, but there are companies who feed off data bloating, like they really are, right? Companies whose business model is purely based around, we expect the data to just completely blow out, right? And they really encourage that in some ways. So there are lots of reasons, lots of really, really good reasons why you're going to collect and keep the data, but you need to think about why. Like, is it for legal purposes? Because email has a lot to do with legal purposes. Is it to do with business purposes? Right, if you're collecting log files and accumulating them over time and keeping them for a long time, like, what's the real point, right? Is it doing something that's really useful or not? You need to think about why. And this is where we need to get smart. So you've got two approaches, actually three. So the first approach is you can keep everything, right? The just in case, right? Because you never know when you might need the data, right? But the problem is, this is hoarding, right? And we often have a natural instinct to hoard because it can feel really good. It can make you feel safe if you have this data just in case you might need it. But the more data you have, the harder it becomes to find exactly what you need. So you can have a very similar problem with monitoring data as well. Okay, the other option is that you keep nothing, right? And this is an extreme problem too. But this is a real problem for us because it means that often we don't have enough data to solve a problem quickly, right? So it's either kind of feast or famine. We've got too much or too little. And I think if we have a bad problem, either way it extends the time to resolution. We kind of need the right data, kind of smart data to help us find where those issues are. So, I kind of love the IKEA approach. I'm a bit of a IKEA fanatic. It's kind of what I do over Christmas when you've got a break and you've got a... Dave's laughing. Yes, you know the story, Dave. You've seen the all IKEA gear. There you go, that's for you. So, but you get the general idea though, is that if you can get the right data and have it in the right place and make it easily accessible, that's a beautiful thing to be, right? That's really the ideal approach. What you don't want is heaps of stuff everywhere, right? Because that doesn't really help. So we want to just essentially get rid of that clutter and be effective. So I'll give you an example of an IT environment that one of our guys actually in the US was talking to the customer, and he was saying, look, your environment, you've got 1,200 servers, you're doing 300,000 transactions per minute, and you're doing a lot of monitoring, and you need to move away from this dumb monitoring to smart monitoring, because dumb monitoring was introducing all this hidden cost. Like they were using 92 servers to pull out a huge amount of information, and it was resulting in something like 80 terabytes of storage per year, which works out to be about $100,000 in Amazon per year just for the data. Like, forget about the hardware and the transmission of it, right, and the management of it. So it worked out to be about $100K per year per storage, but about $800,000 or $900,000 just essentially managing that. So, and the other thing was it added about 8% in terms of servers into the environment, right? So you're adding more load and just essentially more cost into that environment. The problem is though, is that I say big data is bad. Well, not it's bad, but it's dumb. But I think they're actually winning the war at the moment. So the reality is that I think the thing that disk is perceived to be cheap, right? But there's this 80-20 rule. So IBM did a really good study looking at the 5-year cost of data about 20% of the cost is in the upfront capex for the storage, and 80% of the cost is actually managing it. Right? So there's a really big cost, and the CIOs are recognizing it. There was a Gartner study that said about 40 to 60% increase in data year on year, and for the top 3 CIO things that's on their mind, one of the top ones is data storage, because it's a real problem, right? So I guess my view is that monitoring shouldn't be a big cost center. It should be very, very high value, but very low cost, I think. So let's talk about smart data, because that's kind of the approach that we take, is really a smart data approach. And when I say smart data, we're talking about having data that is actionable, that is intelligent, and provides good information. And the way that we turn data into smart data is through having some really smart collection, so only collecting really what you need, some smart correlation, so working out the relationships and cause and effect, looking at the archiving it as well, so how long do we need to keep it for, what do we do when we don't need it anymore. Okay, so let's take an example. So I think data by itself doesn't do us much good, and let's have a look at an example of this. So, for instance, I've got some data here, and I've got a question for you. So, based on this data that we're collecting, is this person performing well? What do you reckon? 150 BPM, blood pressure of 165 over 100. Is the person performing well?
Are they sitting in the chair or are they running?
Yeah.
That's a really good question. Yeah, I like the way you think, right? Okay, so we could be talking about...
That man deserves a next number.
Oh, there you go.
You must have saw your slides earlier.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so but we could be talking about this person, right? And I think, is this person performing well? Maybe, maybe not. Still alive, right? So, but they're two valid data points. Or we're talking about this person. All right, this is Jorrit Bergsma. He's a Dutch speed skater and a marathon skater. So the question is this person performing well with those metrics? I've got to say it's insufficient. Right, we need more data, right? Because we always kind of feel that we need more data. All right, so let's have some more data. Lay it on me. We've got the heart rate of 150. We've got blood pressure. We can collect more. We're collecting the eye colour, the blood type, the white blood cell count, hair colour, height, shoe size, weight, current activity. So this kind of reminds me of, that kind of the sitescope approach, where we grab everything, and then we try and work out what's important and what's not. And I think you need to have a look. Any of this information, it actually doesn't really help us very much. When we get down to these last 2 metrics though, this helps us to really define the difference between person 1 and 2. Right? The weight is very, very different. Person number 1 is sitting, person number 2 is speed skating, marathon skating. Okay, so that's really helping us to differentiate person 1 and person 2 in a really important way. Okay, so the question is person 2, is that person performing well? What do you think? I've got 2 more metrics, the distance of 10,000 metres and a time, 12 metres and 44 seconds. Right, is it performing well? I think so. I'm not really an expert, I'm not really I think they are, but I'm not really 100% sure, because I guess what we're not doing is we haven't got a comparison, okay? So the world record time was 12 minutes and 58 seconds, right? We can consider this to be what we call a baseline, right? We have a baseline, and now we have some metrics, and now we know if the guy's performing well or not, right? And absolutely, so based on that we can say, yes, the person is performing well, and in fact this was in the Winter Olympics, it was a new Olympic world record, based on those metrics, right? So I guess the key point alone though, is that having that data didn't really give us the answer. We needed to apply some smarts to it to really work out if they were performing well or not. And the baselining is critical, and I think we need when we do application monitoring and comparison, we need a baseline to compare against. So are we doing really well compared with last week, last month, earlier in the year? So the baselining is really important. And this becomes a bit of a problem, the problem of context. If we're looking at metrics, like CPU is a really good metric, right? Often you'd say, someone would say, oh, okay, there's a CPU spike. What does a CPU spike mean? And my answer is often, well, who cares? Like, the question should really be, is a CPU spike, is it impacting the business? Is it impacting the response times? Right? That's what's important, not the CPU spike. So I look at it the other way around and apply essentially that context. So we can apply lots more information, and it's often like looking for a needle in a haystack, right? But asking for more and more and more data, just collecting everything, is just increasing the size of the haystack, which is fine if you love haystacks and you've got plenty of time. But we're time poor people, right? Who has enough time? Anyone? Anyone? No. Okay. Okay. So, but it does give us a false sense of security though. And also I love really cool looking graphs, but they often don't really help me as well. So this particular graph, this is a graph of CPU over 6 hours and 5 minutes. So what does this tell us about the business impact or the performance of the application? What does it tell us? Yeah, nothing. Nothing, right? It's all about the context. Okay, but if you have a baseline, it starts to give you more, I guess, better information to say, okay, is what we're doing, is it normal or not? And I start to look at this from an end user response time perspective. Are the response times, are they normal or not? Right? And really helps us to focus on the areas that are abnormal, but we need to know what the baseline is, right? Okay, so we need to have, the monitoring platforms that we use, the third generation monitoring platforms really need to help us do a lot of the heavy lifting. So, given that we're focusing on a really fast mean time to resolution, these days it's really important. So a good example, like a typical Amazon outage, it's about $66,000 per minute, I saw. Healthcare.gov was a really good example as well. Like, when the President of the United States is apologising for a slow application performance, right? You know that people finally get that application performance is actually really important. So what we need our monitoring tools to do is to give us a view from a user and an IT perspective. They need to turn the data into kind of really smart information that's actionable for us. And so to do that we need analytics and correlation and really some intelligent alerting. And also, at the end of the day, we want to help us to resolve these issues, right? Not just to tell us that there is something going wrong. So this is an example of the type of thing that would be really helpful, right? Wouldn't it be good to know if the transactions, if they're normal, or if they're slow, very slow stalling or errors based on baselines, right? Really, really valuable stuff. And often when I see a new application, I don't know if it's normal or not, right? So having a tool to tell you this is normal or this is not normal, it's really valuable. Okay, so going back to my first Shell days, so I started as a graduate at Shell and I went on this rotation cycle. So I spent the first 3 months was in shift operations, and then I spent some time in network support, and then I spent some time in special projects, which is always a bit of a dangerous place, right? Never in your career you really want to be in special projects. But I was in the area that was looking at the disaster recovery plan. And so their disaster recovery plan at Shell was when things completely went to crap, you would drive out to Mount Waverley and you would pull out the manuals and the tapes out of the safe storage in Mount Waverley, right? And I was just thinking, I really hope to God that nothing goes wrong at Shell, because this is a really kind of tentatively bad approach back in those days. So, but we spent a lot of time focusing on disaster recovery and making sure that it actually worked, even though you never actually needed it. And I think we need to spend probably more time in our industry around planning for problem recovery. So what happens when there's a problem, and how do you resolve it in a really fast way? Because I think we think about disaster recovery, and I think day to day we deal with problem recovery all the time, but we often don't kind of really plan for it properly, and that's why we end up in all these war rooms. Hands up who spent a significant amount of time in war rooms? Yeah, and it's never, and also when you go into those war rooms, right, it's never, everyone I talk to, it's never their fault. Right, it's always, it's the network, or it's a DBA, or if it's application security, and especially when there are third parties involved as well, right? Even if it's their fault, it's not their fault, right? So you need to, we need to have a way of really dealing with these problems in a really effective way. That's my take. Oh, yeah, so that was my version of the Shell disaster recovery plan. It was like, if something goes wrong, what do we do? Panic. So we need to focus on problem recovery instead, I think. And so problem recovery is kind of different. We need to think about this from a strategic perspective. Like, what do we do when we have a problem? How do we deal with it? What kind of information do we need? Where are our gaps? Right? What don't we have to quickly solve these problems? And there probably isn't one tool that fits all to do this, but you need to understand what are the tools that we need, what are the processes, and what are the things that are really valuable to us. And I think that's really what needs to go into a problem recovery approach. You know, and frankly, this is kind of some of the day-to-day business of, you know, I guess, what are the performance companies like ESETA and Co do in the market, right? Is really to help rid the world of poorly performing applications, and part of that is really knowing what you do, have a plan and a strategy of what you do when there's a problem. How do you deal with that? So, you know, the problem is though is that, you know, often when we do have these problems, a lot of it's an afterthought, and the information that we want we weren't capturing at the time, right? So you need that good in context information. Okay, so when a problem occurs, what do you need? Like what do you guys need to find the root cause?
Facts.
Yeah, you need the facts, right? At the time when it actually happened. And often, yeah, it can be. Oh, yes, that's right.
That's what I'm here for.
That's what you're here for. And I heard something from you, Joel, as well. There you go. Oh, yeah, okay, so yeah, we need the facts, right? But there are so many facts, and we need information from different areas. And often it's to help work out where the problem is not, right? So we need information, yes, down the back.
I think also definition of the problem. So, this is the problem. Let's define it. Is it really a problem or not?
Yeah.
Establish this definition before you start into it.
Yes, yeah, I agree. And because there are times when you might want to solve an issue before it becomes a Sev 1, right? And I think that's actually really important of working out how you do that. Yeah, it's a good point. I can't go all the way down the back. Put it.
Ready for it?
If
I take off someone's head, I apologise in advance, right?
This is
Oh, Jesus, sorry. Almost got Melgar then, didn't I? Sorry, Dave.
yeah.
I'm a much better software guy than I am a thrower.
Yeah. Thank God for that.
Don't go to your day job.
Yeah. Okay, so we need a lot of information, but we kind of need the right information at the right time, and especially when we move to these big distributed environments that are out in the cloud. You know, you almost need, whenever you have a problem, you need a PR strategy as well, right? Because that's going to be an important part too. So, yeah, in fact, okay, a good example of a company that didn't really have a PR strategy at the time. So I was just reminiscing with someone about some of my early performance testing was with RMIT. And you remember the student administration system? This is quite some years ago.
Yes.
And they were a big political football, right? Because they had really big performance issues, and the vice chancellor was under attack from the student union. Right? They didn't really have a PR way of dealing with problems at the time. You know, I learned that the interesting way. So yeah, okay, so we need good modern ways of doing this, and I think one of the ways to help us really find issues very quickly and reduce the size of the haystack is to use essentially a smart data strategy. So okay, so kind of the pretext here is that most APM tools are dumb, and when I say dumb, I essentially mean that we kind of collect all this information without kind of doing it in a really filtered way, a really intelligent filtered way, because it's really easy to collect a whole lot of information. And I think one of the reasons why is that, you know, I guess the evolutionary origin is from infrastructure monitoring tools that collect a huge amount of stuff, and I think they're even dumber. And when I say even dumber, right, they're kind of even less selective about what they capture, right? You just kind of suck in everything that's absolutely available, and the more things that are available, the more things you capture. It's just a strategy that's really fraught with I think very little intelligence. And so you know, we need to come from this from a context, right? And I think it really helps to understand, first of all, what is the impact? And if it's impacting users, well, who are the users? What are the KPIs that you're going to be looking for? So, and from an end user perspective, you know, there are lots of ways to capture this type of information, lots of tools. You know, I often refer to them as end user experience monitoring, or real user monitoring, or end user monitoring, or user experience monitoring, or real end user experience monitoring. You know, yeah. The whole idea though is to understand exactly what the impact is to the end users, right? So when we're looking at KPIs from the end user experience, we need to be able to say, well, start to triage. Is the issue with the front end? Is it with the network? Or is it with the servers in the back end? Right, and help to start to work out where that is. And that's really where some analytics really helps, and baselining helps as well. So once we look at what the end users are doing, essentially say, well, okay, we can look at this from an approach. We look at a business transaction. What is the end user doing? What's important? And we can say, well, that's a really important thing for us to measure. And how are they impacted? Where are the errors? Are they running slow? Are they running abnormally? And that's a really good way to focus. Of course, the path of a transaction through a complex infrastructure can be, well, it's complex, right? It can be very, very distributed. Issues can be everywhere. But if you're looking at a business transaction as the constant, then it really helps. That helps you to focus on the things that are changing, right? Because when things go wrong, often look at what's changed, and that's often a cause of the issue. So all along the way, we want to have a look at where the transactions are flowing. And this is just an example. One of my examples of a business transaction that starts at a particular tier and then it flows out to a whole lot of other tiers and around, and we can get a good understanding of where the time is spent in the back ends and other systems as well. And that helps us to really understand, from a performance perspective, with this one transaction, where is it going? Where is the time being spent? Right? So that's a really important thing to learn. And if we really want to drill down into the methods, then we can say, okay, well, if something is running slow, we want to grab a snapshot, have a look at the flow of calls, understand exactly where. So we might have a HTTP error that's taking about 15 seconds, and I can automatically see that the time is being spent here. And this is really kind of smart contextual information to help us find where these issues are. But this is the problem, where if you're doing this, where you're capturing every single one of these all the time, this is where you get that data bloating. Right? This is the 80 terabytes of data. Right? This is really expensive stuff to capture and keep. So the question is, well, we want to do this in a smart contextual way. We want to capture these ones, but only when they're important. Right? So that's really where we want to get smart. So to reduce the amount of data, capture it in a smart way, we essentially need to have smart agents that are being kind of really intelligent, working out, okay, exactly what is normal and not normal. We need to have a smart way of aggregating to say, okay, what's the correlation between these issues, what's the cause and effect, what's the downstream effect on the end users, and also we need to be smart about the archiving approach as well. So what do we keep and what do we throw away? What do we need and what don't we need? Right? So these are some of the approaches that we use to go from this dumb approach, which is really kind of data hoarding, to something which is much more effective and targeted. And once you have that information, you can do really good things with it. So you can do things like you can quantify the impact. So when we have application response times that spike,